Hey folks, this is Pastor Jim from Crosspoint Church in Bettendorf, Iowa. There are stories in the Bible that are difficult to read and even more difficult to understand. The story of Achan is one of those stories. It's the story of the nation of Israel going to battle against the Canaanites with the clear instructions from God that they were not to plunder or pillage anything. Everything was supposed to be destroyed. And yet Achan finds a beautiful robe and a large amount of gold and silver. And to use his own words, he says he covets it, and he took it and hid it under his tent. His sin, of course, is found out, and him and his family are stoned and burned, and a pile of rocks is heaped on their grave to warn the rest of the nation what happens when you fall out of covenant with God. It's a tragic story. The whole, most of the history of Israel is a tragic history. How do we reconcile this story with the God of grace? How do we reconcile the story with God's own promise to his people that the sins of the parents wouldn't be paid for by the children? Well, although this is a thorny issue, it's helpful to understand that God, in dealing with the ancient Israelites, dealt with them differently in terms of legal matters than he did with them in terms of covenantal matters. In terms of legal matters, if a person stole or lied or even committed murder, that individual was held responsible for his or her own sin. The children weren't held accountable for it. But in covenantal matters, when a person sinned against God, that person's sin was seen through the collective lens of the entire nation, and this is true throughout their history. And so Achan's sin was a covenantal sin, and one that violated the covenant with God that he was going to give them the land, but they had to be completely loyal, completely holy, and completely obedient. This is difficult for us to understand from our individualistic Western perspective, but God still deals with this covenantally through the collective lens of his people. Paul, writing in Romans 5, said that through one man's transgression, that is Adam, sin entered the whole world. In the same way, through one person's righteousness, that is Jesus, grace enters the world. And we are under the covenant of grace, and it's not determined by our behavior. This is something that God said that he was going to do based on the obedience of his Son and the righteousness of his Son, Jesus. So when we read these stories in the Old Testament, it reveals to us how we deserve to be treated. We all fall under the condemnation of sin because of Adam's sin. We all deserve death. We all deserve destruction. And yet, through the righteous act of Jesus Christ, we find grace. In fact, Paul, writing in that same context in Romans 5, said, where sin abounded, grace much more abounds. These stories shouldn't harden our hearts towards God, but it should drive us into the arms of our Lord Jesus Christ, where grace much more abounds. We're going to take a look at this in more detail this Sunday at 9:15 and 11. I hope you can make it. I think you'll be glad that you did. Thanks for listening. I'll see you then.